My name is Nadje Al-Ali. I'm Professor of Gender Studies at SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies, the University of London. I'm a feminist scholar, anthropologist by training, and I have worked for the past 15 years on women and gender in the Middle East, first focusing on Egypt and then Iraq. But I'm also an activist, peace activist and feminist activist. And I co-founded in the 90s the organization Act Together Women's Action for Iraq. And over the past, over 10 years, I have been working both academically and politically in relation to Iraq, both against sanctions and against military invasion, and also trying to document the impact of the occupation. And my comments really, I'm wearing different hats when I'm speaking now. I mean, on one level it's me, the scholar, speaking, and me, the scholar, speaking. I'm very much aware of the fact that everywhere in the world, I mean, historically and cross-culturally, there is a relationship between the militarization of society and the increase in gender-based violence. I mean, this has been documented historically and cross-culturally. So my first point would be that military interventions and the militarization of society inevitably have a negative impact on women and gender relations. And one reason this is the case is because the militarization of society leads to the glorification of certain forms of masculinities, that is, militarized, authoritarian, patriarchal masculinities. And also militarization leads to greater political authoritarianism and hierarchies. So that's kind of my more conceptual, theoretical stand about the relationship between women's rights, equality, social justice and militarization. I don't think that a military invasion or the rule of the military can bring about peace for women. It might be able to create national security, but I don't think it creates human security, and particularly security for women. Now, I am of course also speaking as someone who has been working academically and politically on Iraq, and I'm also half Iraqi, and here all the experiences of Iraq the last, 2 decades show me two things. One thing is that sanctions are a form of warfare, and if anything, economic sanctions on Iraq did not weaken the government but actually strengthened the government. It made the population more dependent on the government, because at some point people were dependent on monthly food rations. The humanitarian crisis was horrendous, and people became so busy just trying to survive that they actually didn't have much time to get involved in any kind of politics. And certainly not oppositional politics. So that's one point. And also, of course, sanctions creates a system whereby those close to the regime profit from sanctions through smuggling, and you always have a class of society that actually gains economically while the majority of the population is impoverished. So that's my point about sanctions, and in the Iraqi context it really had a devastating impact on Iraqi society, particularly women again, who were being pushed into the private sphere outside their workplaces, and there was a shift towards greater social conservatism in the 90s. Now, of course, I know that lots of Iraqis very much supported a military invasion in the run-up to the invasion of 2003, because they found life unbearable between dictatorship and sanctions. People felt really squeezed. And I understood why some people felt that this was the only way out. I personally didn't think that this would be the way out, and unfortunately history has shown that I was right, and those of us who were against the military invasion were right. Because yes, it is true we got rid of Saddam Hussein, but what do we have now? Actually, we have lots of mini dictators. We don't have a democracy, we don't have a secure country. We have an incredibly insecure country where sectarianism is widespread, where there is no rule of law, where you have militias ruling the street, with arms. And certainly I would argue that women have been the biggest losers. I mean, the increase of gender-based violence at the hand of government militias, at the hand of insurgents, at the hand of police, criminal gangs, has just been devastating. And so I strongly urge, everyone, but particularly Iranians, to campaign against both sanctions and against military invasion of Iran. That does not mean that one should stop being critical of the government, because again, I mean, in the Iraqi context, that was a challenge to, of course, be in opposition to the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, but also oppose, the policy of sanctions and warfare. And I think the world is not black and white. We need to take nuanced positions, and being against one thing doesn't mean that we have to be for the other.